Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a cliff, not the physical kind, the kind no one else can see. Behind you is the life you've lived, careful, comfortable, socially approved. Ahead of you, a drop into the unknown, a confrontation with everything you've avoided, cowardice, rage, desire, power, and weakness. Your breath shortens, your legs shake, but not from fear of falling. No, what terrifies you is the realization that you might have already fallen years ago. Slowly, quietly, willingly, not from a cliff but into a form of spiritual sedation. You traded your sword for a smile, your hunger for acceptance, your instincts for ideology. You were told it was good to be gentle, mature to restrain yourself, moral to yield, and so you folded, again and again, until one day you looked in the mirror and could no longer remember what it felt like to be dangerous. And yet, you feel it, don't you? Deep in the marrow of your being, that raw, untamed force you buried beneath layers of politeness and guilt. What if that buried part was the most honest version of you? Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "What is good? Everything that heightens the feeling of power in man." To many, these words reek of cruelty, of ego, of a violent world better left in the past. But what if he wasn't wrong? What if we've misread strength for evil and weakness for virtue? What if your moral compass isn't a guide, but a leash? You've heard it your whole life. Be kind, be tolerant, forgive, turn the other cheek. But ask yourself, who benefits when you always turn the other cheek? Who profits from your endless self-sacrifice? Who feeds off your need to be accepted, applauded, domesticated? Now imagine a child. Wild, screaming, selfish, demanding, raw. He's not bad yet, not until he's taught to be quiet, to sit still, to suppress the fire in his chest. He is molded piece by piece into something acceptable, civilized, weak. And the stronger his will, the more violent the suppression must be. Fast forward, that same child is now an adult. He's agreeable, educated, well-liked. But inside him rots the skeleton of everything he once was. He's a shell performing goodness but dreaming of rebellion. He nods in meetings. He avoids confrontation. He lets people walk over him because he's afraid to become what exactly? A tyrant, a villain, or maybe finally himself. Nietzsche didn't glorify brute strength. He diagnosed a civilization dying from spiritual anemia, infected by what he called slave morality. A worldview born not from confidence but from resentment. It doesn't elevate the weak, it weaponizes weakness. It teaches you to fear the powerful, not because they are evil, but because you are not one of them. You've been told that humility is a virtue, but humility is often just shame dressed up in theological silk. You were told pride goeth before the fall, but what if it's shame that guarantees the fall because it makes you deny your own height? Do you think it's a coincidence that so many are depressed, anxious, lost, not because they failed, but because they succeeded in becoming what society asked of them? They trimmed their edges. They apologized for their passions. They sanded down their soul until nothing sharp remained, and still they're not happy. They're not proud. They're not alive. The paradox is brutal. The more we try to be good by society's standards, the further we drift from our nature. And the more we drift from our nature, the sicker we become, psychologically, spiritually, even physically. So here's the great, blasphemous question. What if weakness isn't a flaw to be pitied, but a virus to be eradicated? What if every time you let it slide, every time you take the high road, every time you suppress your rage in the name of being a better person, you are not becoming more virtuous, you are becoming less real? And what if that truth, ugly as it is, could set you free? You've felt it, haven't you? That flicker. That moment when you stood up for yourself and it felt good, not guilty. When you stopped apologizing for taking up space. When you let the fire speak before the filter. What if that wasn't your shadow, but your soul? And if Nietzsche was right, what does that mean for the entire moral structure of your life? You weren't born afraid of your power, you were taught to fear it. You were not born with shame for your desires, your ambition, your voice, your anger. That shame was planted, watered, cultivated. Like weeds choking a once wild garden, it grew with every lesson disguised as virtue, every scolding masked as morality, every subtle glance from a parent, teacher, or priest that said, "That part of you is dangerous." But dangerous to whom? Imagine a civilization built not on strength, but on control, not on freedom, but predictability. Such a society doesn't need lions, it needs sheep. It needs workers who obey, not warriors who question. And so it manufactures weakness and sells it back to you as decency. The child who challenges authority is called troubled. The man who speaks with conviction is labeled arrogant. The woman who asserts herself is difficult. Enter Nietzsche's diagnosis, ressentiment. This isn't just resentment in the casual sense. Ressentiment is a psychological poison, a deep, festering hatred disguised as righteousness. It begins with the weak envying the strong, but instead of acknowledging their envy, they invert the moral order. They declare their weakness to be a virtue and strength to be evil. "I don't want power," says the powerless, because power corrupts. It is the morality of the slave, the man who cannot escape his chains and therefore declares chains to be noble. The woman who cannot stand alone and thus preaches dependence as love. The crowd that cannot create and so burns the creators at the stake. Nietzsche saw through it all. He looked into the depths of Western civilization and saw a morality born not from courage but from fear, not from creativity but from impotence. The meek inherited the earth, but not through innocence, through ideology. Carl Jung took this even further. He warned that what we suppress doesn't vanish, it festers in the unconscious. That anger you swallowed, it didn't disappear, it went underground. That lust you denied, that ambition you disowned, they became shadows, and the more you repress them, the more control they have over you. You think you're being good, but what if you're just being hollow? What if the very parts of yourself you've rejected, your aggression, your pride, your assertiveness, are the same parts that once kept your ancestors alive? What if they're not sins but instincts? And what happens to a species that declares war on its own instincts? Arthur Schopenhauer, Nietzsche's philosophical predecessor, believed life itself was driven by an irrational will, a blind, ceaseless striving. To live was to suffer. But Nietzsche rejected Schopenhauer's resignation. He believed the will, this burning inner force, was not a curse to overcome, but the very engine of greatness. Modern psychology echoes this, albeit in different terms. Suppression leads to neurosis. Shame breeds self-destruction. The human mind, when severed from its primal roots, doesn't become angelic, it becomes fragmented. The nice man who explodes in road rage. The obedient wife who suddenly cheats. The quiet boy who turns violent. None of these are outliers, they are symptoms of a system that demands masks instead of integration, of a morality that amputates the soul piece by piece. Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, once wrote that what man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal. Yet society teaches us to avoid struggle, to seek ease, to conform and be safe. But safety isn't peace, it's sedation. So what is the hidden problem? It is this: you've been trained to believe your strength is dangerous. And worse, you've come to believe it yourself. You apologize for wanting more. You minimize your hunger. You call your dreams unrealistic to make others comfortable. You laugh nervously when you express a bold opinion, just in case someone's offended. You flinch at your own potential. This isn't humility, it's internalized defeat. And yet the soul aches. It knows something's wrong. It knows that behind the curtain of moral politeness lies something raw, something ancient, something unkillable. You can feel it when you speak a truth no one dares say, when you break a rule and don't apologize, when you fantasize not about peace, but about conquest, creation, power. It doesn't make you a monster, it makes you human. Nietzsche didn't preach domination for its own sake. He despised tyrants as much as he despised cowards. What he revered was nobility, the inner sovereignty of the one who creates values rather than consumes them, the one who rises from chaos and declares, "I will be the meaning." You have that capacity, but you've been told to forget it. Because if too many people remember, the world as it is would collapse. What would happen if you stopped apologizing for your fire? What if, instead of shrinking, you expanded? What if you stopped asking, "Is this allowed?" and started asking, "Is this true?" These questions burn, because once asked, they cannot be unasked. They dissolve the mental shackles, they reawaken the instinct to rebel. And rebellion, once awakened, doesn't settle for scraps. It wants everything. You wake up, you check your phone, you see someone celebrating mediocrity again. Another influencer preaching self-love as an excuse to avoid growth. Another article demonizing ambition in the name of work-life balance. Another politician glorifying victimhood to gain sympathy points. Another corporate slogan engineered to feel empowering while keeping you compliant. And you think it's normal. But it's not. It's a subtle spiritual lobotomy, and it's everywhere. We are living in an empire of weakness, carefully engineered to appear compassionate. But behind the curtain of kindness lies a hidden directive: stay small, stay manageable, stay weak. You don't see chains anymore. You don't need to. Your jailer lives in your head. He speaks in your voice, telling you to be realistic, not rock the boat, not speak too loudly. He wears a therapist's smile, a teacher's tone, a friend's concern. He tells you that ambition is dangerous, that anger is toxic, that power always corrupts. And so you neuter yourself with polite words and careful steps. You become palatable, predictable, peaceful. But peace without strength is not peace. It is paralysis. The psychology of learned powerlessness. Martin Seligman called it learned helplessness. Originally discovered through experiments on dogs, the phenomenon occurs when a creature is exposed to repeated suffering it cannot escape. Eventually, it stops trying. Even when the door is open, the dog won't leave. It no longer believes in its agency. Now imagine that same principle applied to humans, not through torture but through subtle social engineering. Every time you are told to sit still, to be a good boy, a nice girl, to let others go first, to not raise your voice, to suppress your needs. Eventually, you stop trying. You stop pushing. You stop dreaming. Not because you don't want more, but because something inside you whispers. It's not for you. It's invisible, that's the point. It doesn't break you all at once. It bends you quietly until you mistake submission for stability. Societies worship a victimhood. We live in a culture where being a victim gives you moral capital, where outrage is a form of identity, where the more oppressed you are, the more authority you claim. Nietzsche would have seen this as ressentiment in its final form, a reversal so complete that power itself is now seen as shameful. We confuse compassion with appeasement. We treat fragility as wisdom. We pedestalize emotional volatility as authenticity. But this isn't healing, it's indulgence. The mind, like the body, needs resistance to grow. But we've removed resistance in the name of comfort. And now we're shocked that people are spiritually flabby, emotionally brittle, psychologically dependent. Because we told them that was healthy. We told them discomfort is trauma. That criticism is violence. That challenge is abuse. And in doing so, we've bred a generation of glass egos and rubber spines, too fragile to fight, too proud to admit it. Neuroscience and the wiring of weakness. From a neurological standpoint, every belief you reinforce builds pathways in the brain. If you repeatedly reward yourself for avoiding discomfort, dopamine hits from distractions, praise for self-pity, validation for quitting, you are literally training your brain to seek weakness. You're wiring yourself to fail. Neuroplasticity doesn't care what's true, it cares what's repeated. And what's repeated culturally is the glorification of softness, the erosion of edge. We confuse kindness with niceness, assertiveness with aggression, confidence with narcissism. But your brain knows better. Deep down, your nervous system remembers a time when fear was a signal to act, not to hide. When anger was a call to reclaim dignity, not to self-flagellate in shame. We've turned fire into a flaw, and then we wonder why the world is so cold. The passive tyranny of good intentions. Good intentions can be deadly. Imagine a parent who never lets their child fall, who praises them for every minor task, who shields them from failure, pain, challenge. That child grows up sheltered, not loved, dependent, not strong. Now zoom out. Apply that same parental overreach to entire societies. That's where we are. We've built a culture that shields people from their own becoming. That hands out trophies for breathing. That censors truth to protect feelings. That rewards outrage over resilience. The consequence? Mass neurosis, widespread anxiety, epidemic depression. Because no amount of comfort can substitute for power. Not power over others, but over yourself, over your mind, over your choices. And that kind of power doesn't come from affirmations or safe spaces. It comes from struggle, from truth, from confrontation with the real. But if struggle is pathologized, if truth is censored, if confrontation is evil, then you have no path to sovereignty. You are left with a hollow shell of humanity, emotionally dependent, intellectually shallow, spiritually sterile. A domesticated animal in a zoo of virtue. The illusion of progress. We think we've evolved. We point to technology, to tolerance, to social justice movements and say, look how far we've come. But what if that's a trick? What if our tools advanced but our souls regressed? What if we solved hunger only to breed gluttony? Solved silence only to drown in noise? Solved oppression only to become slaves to our own narratives? Progress, if it demands the death of the will, is not progress, it is regression. And behind every smiling selfie, every clickbait headline, every hollow virtue signal, is a person unsure if they're truly alive. They look successful. They sound compassionate. But they feel empty. Because deep inside they know. They have never been tested. They have never fought for something real. They have never bled for truth. And without that, no amount of therapy, no amount of likes, no amount of self-care can fill the void. The soul cannot be comforted into greatness. It must be forged. You've been lied to. Not in some overt conspiratorial way, but in whispers, in cultural lullabies, in the subtle tightening of a leash you were told was a necklace. The lie was simple, that to be good is to be soft, agreeable, safe. That to be strong is to be dangerous, toxic, wrong. And maybe you've believed it. Maybe you felt guilt every time you said no without an explanation. Maybe you've been called selfish for choosing your own path. Maybe you felt that hot, electric pulse of power rise in your chest and shoved it down like a criminal urge. But now something's shifting. That fire is back. And this time you won't extinguish it, you'll feed it. Step 1, reclaim the forbidden emotions. Start with what you've been told to bury. Anger, pride, desire, ambition. These are not flaws, they are fuel. Every one of them, when integrated rather than suppressed, becomes a tool of transformation. Anger reveals boundaries you didn't know were crossed. Pride reminds you that you matter. Desire awakens movement. Ambition is the forward pull of life itself. Nietzsche's Übermensch, the overman, was not some comic book god. He was a human who had integrated his chaos, who created values from within rather than inherited them blindly. He did not beg the world for permission to exist. He declared himself. You can do this too. Next time you feel anger, don't shame it. Ask, what truth is this pointing to? Next time you feel pride, don't downplay it. Ask, what have I earned that I'm afraid to own? Next time you feel desire, don't fear it. Ask, what part of me wants to come alive? Rebellion begins by listening to what the world taught you to mute. Step 2, choose sovereignty over safety. You will be tempted to go back, to nod along, to stay nice. Don't. Nice is a strategy. Sovereignty is a state of being. You don't owe anyone an explanation for being fully alive, for speaking the truth before it's approved, for wanting more than mediocrity, for refusing to carry dead relationships, dead jobs, dead beliefs. This is not cruelty, it's clarity. To break free, you must be willing to disappoint others before you betray yourself. Because the world will always applaud your compliance and punish your authenticity. That is the cost of sovereignty, but what you get in return is priceless. Self-respect, vision, fire, life. The rebel pays in blood. But he wakes up proud. Step 3, kill the inner critic. You know the voice. The one that says, who do you think you are? You'll fail. You're not enough. That's not how normal people live. That voice is not your conscience, it's your conditioning. It's the echo of teachers who never chased their own dreams, parents who feared their own power, friends who settled and resented your hunger. It sounds like you, but it's not you. So next time it whispers, ask, whose voice is this really? And then burn it. Write it out, speak against it, laugh at its cowardice. You are not here to repeat their limitations, you are here to transcend them. Nietzsche called this the revaluation of all values. It means tearing down the old statues in your mind and erecting new ones, built not from fear but from force, not shame but sovereignty. Step 4, rebuild rituals of strength. Weakness is not just emotional, it's architectural. Look at your routines, your habits, your inputs. Are they feeding the fire or drowning it? Do you scroll before you speak your thoughts into being? Do you consume passively before you create courageously? Do you hide behind "I'm tired" instead of standing up and bleeding into something that matters. This is not about becoming a robot of productivity. It's about choosing rituals that make you remember who you are. Wake before the world does. Move your body like it was built to conquer. Read those whose words punch your soul awake. Create more than you consume. Speak more truth than comfort. Every act of strength is a rebellion. Every time you rise when it's easier to retreat, you are rewriting reality. Step 5, find the others. You will not do this alone. Not because you're weak, but because rebellion was never meant to be solitary. Nietzsche believed that most men are too afraid to live without a herd, but a rare few become shepherds of fire, and when they meet, there is no need for masks. Find them. Seek those who do not flinch at truth, who will challenge you instead of coddle you, who will call you out when you're being less than you are and stand beside you when you rise into more than you imagined. This is your tribe, not of comfort, but of becoming. They will not rescue you, they will sharpen you. And in that friction, you will remember the ancient law. Iron sharpens iron. You were not born to kneel. You were born with a storm in your bones. You were born to break the code and write your own. You were born to look society in the face and say, I see through you. This rebellion isn't about rage. It's about reclamation. Of soul. Of voice. Of truth. Because when you finally strip away the lies, the layers, the leashes, you don't find a monster. You find the maker. It begins in silence. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of lies. When you have burned down every borrowed virtue, when the last mask melts off your face, when even your rebellion feels like an echo of something deeper, you are left with this. Your naked will. Not shaped by society. Not bound by morality. Not caged by history. Just you staring into the abyss and smiling. This is the moment Nietzsche lived for. The crucible where the false self dies and the true self emerges, not from doctrine but from fire, not from obedience but from creation. And in that stillness, one truth rises above all. You are the source, not a servant of values, but their creator. Not a seeker of meaning, but its author. Not a victim of fate, but its sculptor. The weakness you feared all along wasn't outside of you. It was the part of you that outsourced your truth. The part that begged for permission. That needed someone to say, you're good. But now you know you don't need to be good, you need to be whole. And wholeness is not clean, it is not pretty, it is not polite. It is a beautiful, dangerous fusion of heaven and hell within you. Of beast and sage, of instinct and intellect, of wildness and wisdom. Carl Jung called this individuation, the integration of your shadow into your conscious identity. He knew that the goal of life wasn't to become good, but to become real, to bring the unconscious into the light, to look the demon in the eye and realize he is you. You are not here to be saved. You are here to wake up. The death of false morality. You were taught to live by rules created by men long dead. Told to emulate saints who castrated their souls. Commanded to avoid sin, but never shown how to embrace truth. And here is the deepest blasphemy. There is no universal morality. Only the morality you create when you become strong enough to bear its consequences. Nietzsche called this the death of God, not the literal God, but the death of unquestioned values, of moral absolutes, of invisible authorities. When God dies, so does the safety net of should. And in that terrifying void, you are reborn. Free, terribly, gloriously alone. And yet not alone, because when you meet another who has walked this path, there is a silent recognition, not a handshake but a fire passing between eyes. You both know. You are gods now, not by power but by authorship. The sacred burden of creation. But freedom is not without cost. Now that you see, you cannot unsee. Now that you know, you cannot pretend. You cannot blame others, not anymore. You cannot cry injustice when you have the sword in your own hand. This is the sacred burden. You must create your own meaning. There is no script, no 10 commandments, no grand narrative to kneel beneath. You write the commandments now. You build the narrative. and you carry the weight of its failure and its glory on your own shoulders. It is terrifying, and it is everything. Because when you create your own values, they are no longer borrowed. They are no longer fragile. They are no longer dependent on the approval of the tribe. They are carved in your blood, forged in your struggle, unshakable. That is the mark of the Übermensch, not arrogance but authorship, not dominance but divine responsibility. You are not just a product of history. You are its correction, the beauty of becoming. And so you rise, not as a finished thing, but as an evolving force. No more seeking wholeness in others. No more craving applause. No more asking, am I enough? You are not enough, you are becoming. You are the storm before the sky clears. You are the scream before the silence. You are the pain before the truth breaks through. And in that agony, that ecstasy, you are reborn again and again. Like fire that never dies. Like truth that cannot be silenced. You finally see the paradox for what it is. Weakness was never the absence of strength. It was the absence of truth, of voice, of will. And now you have reclaimed all three. You are not saved, you are sovereign. You are not loved, you are known. You are not chosen, you are choosing. So was Nietzsche right about weakness? No, he wasn't just right. He was merciful enough to tell the truth when no one else dared. Final image. You walking into the chaos, not with fear but with fire in your eyes. No script, no guide, no leash. Only will. Only truth. Only you. And for the first time, that is enough.